This is my great-grandfather, Long Tack Sam. I never met him, never knew much about him. Maybe that's an immigrant thing, not passing on stories. But he seems to be trying to tell me something here, and now I wish I could hear what he's saying. When I was a kid, I knew he was from China, but I'd only seen pictures of him wearing Western clothes. I knew he was very short and liked to smoke a big cigar. And I knew he was a magician. He could make coins appear from behind your ear. Oh, and that he knew Ed Sullivan and Jack Benny and Orson Welles. And he worked with Laurel and Hardy and George Burns and Gracie Allen and Cary Grant. So he was in show business. So what? Who was he exactly?
Let me talk about Long Tack Sam, who was one of the biggest acts in American vaudeville.
Mr. Sun Tai know the history of Long Tack Sam, yeah.
他这是在美国的。
This is in America.
Yeah, he was a magician, you know, and he was Chinese. And everybody went. Yes, that's right.
Well, he was super.
He's a myth.
Yeah, he's a myth. Yeah, he's very famous.
I knew he was very short. Now, I knew he's very big. A magician, an acrobat, with a world-traveling full Chinese review. If he was so famous, why is he forgotten? Why doesn't my family even talk about him anymore? Where did he come from? I went to talk to his son, my great-uncle, who, I realized, I had never asked a personal question to as an adult in my life.
I know nothing about his family at all. I don't know his background at all, and he never wanted to talk about it.
In fact, there was nobody in my family who knew. But once upon a time, Long Tack Sam shared his story with the world.
When I was 5 years old, famine came to our North Chinese country. We were hungry and miserable. A magician came working miracles. He was a famous friend of the spirits. His name was Wang. He could take needles out of his mouth for half an hour at a time. He could make beautiful vases appear in the middle of the door. He could perform 100 magic feats. I said to myself, surely he can turn stones into bread. I went and bowed before the magician Wang and told him I was hungry and begged him to make bread for me. He squatted in the public square and replied that there were marvels that the spirits would allow to be worked only before adepts. He sometimes performed the mysterious and terrible rite of conjuring bread, but only in the presence of his pupils or of wizards of high degree. I begged him to take me as one of his pupils. He agreed and had me take him to my parents. They gladly bound me over to so great a man in so wondrous a profession. Wang taught me the art of Chinese necromancy. The Chinese magician undergoes a long and arduous training. He begins as a child and studies until he has reached manhood and adepthood. And then he sallies forth and displays his certificate of graduation and works his art on street corners, in the popular theaters, and in the palaces of the mandarins. Upon my graduation, I joined a Western circus performing in China. And when they returned to the Occident, I went with them. I will not see China again for 20 years.
Poverty, transformation, adventure, what a story! But was it true? I was determined to find out. To paraphrase the great bard Bob Marley, you have to know where you come from so you can know where you're going to. I come from a restless family who live all over the world, and we are not so much in touch. But I need to find them. I need their help to find out about Long Tack Sam's world, and the help of many others. After Sam left China, I heard that he went to America, and I heard that he went to England. I went to Austria because I knew that he married his wife, my great-grandmother, there in 1908. This is where she's from. I tell you now, she was neither Chinese nor a circus performer, nor had ever been out of this village. I went to talk to an old friend of the family, my grandmother's childhood sweetheart, Ernst Kriegbaum. This is his story.
Sam war mit einer Artistengruppe in Linz und ist im Kolosseum aufgetreten als Artist.
While on a European tour, Sam did some shopping in a department store in Linz, Austria. While purchasing soap and toothpaste, he met the shop girl Leopoldina Rüssner. They soon fell in love.
Poldi,
Ja?
will you marry me?
Ja!
Is that romantic or what? This is Poldi. This is Sam, her future husband. Crazy. What were they thinking? Sam fell in love, proposed, and then was off to Budapest with his troupe, writing love letters back to Poldi in broken German.
Meine liebe Poldi, I send you endless kisses.
I was lucky enough to interview their daughter, my grandmother, Minna, just before she passed away.
It was one of the biggest weddings in Vienna. They were married by Father Gattinger, that's Father Gattinger, who was also a missionary in China. So he had the sermon said in Chinese and in Austrian.
It made the front page of every Austrian newspaper. Granny kept a copy in her closet. I had to learn German before I could read what it said.
And my father, who was a Buddhist, became a Roman Catholic.
War es nicht komisch, dass in 1908 ein chinesischer Zauberer hat ein Y verheiratet?
Ja, das war sehr komisch. War sehr komisch. Aber es war große Liebe.
Sam and Poldi may have found great love, but there was still a show to run. Not only was he an hour late for the wedding, but Sam had a performance booked that evening and took off right after the ceremony. He was on the road all the time. Sam is director of the Tan Kwai acrobatic troupe. They are known particularly for their hair tricks. I don't think many people did hair tricks because, as you can imagine, it was extremely painful. The queue, or long braid, Sam and his troupe wear, is associated with the Qing dynasty. It's there so that when you die, you can be pulled up to the heavens. Sam may be in Austria, but what is happening in China is still going to directly affect his braid. The same year he gets married, the child king Puyi ascends to the throne. The next year, Poldi gives birth to my grandmother, Hermine, also known as Minna, who you've just met. The next year, she gives birth to Leopoldine, also known as Poldi. The next year, things get complicated and worlds start to collide. Puyi and his empire are overthrown in China. Wearing long hair is now seen as supporting the Qing dynasty and as an act of treason. Those who continue to wear it face execution. The Tan Kwai troupe had to cut off their braids. No more hair, no more hair tricks. And the economy in Europe is terrible. Sam is forced to leave his young family and try his fortunes in America. It only takes about a week to sail across the Atlantic. The popular entertainment of the day, the stage shows known as vaudeville, are in full swing. Sam presents a full show of traditional Chinese circus acts. American audiences loved it. There's just one problem. The booking agent mistakes the Tan Kwai troupe for a famous vaudeville crooner, Eva Tan Gay. Sam changes their name to the Imperial Pekingese troupe. Unfortunately, they are booked as a dog act. Sam changes their name to his own. At least, that's what I read. What immigrant coming to North America hasn't been willing to fiddle with their name? And I guess that's an old show business tradition, too.
The name Long Tack Sam really is an attempt to write in English the sound of the name. Pronounce it again.
Long is Chinese called wolf.
Yeah. What is Shan? It's really, the symbol is Shan.
So he took the foreign name Sam.
Then Sam, of course, was his real first name.
And Long the Shan means
take it easy.
It's just easy, you know.
Wolf. Get a mountain.
I need to find out more about vaudeville, about magic, and especially about Long Tack Sam. So I go to Chicago. This is Jay Marshall, Dean of the Society of American Magicians. He is best known for the thing he does with a glove, named Lefty. He met Long Tack Sam in Boston in 1952. But this whole magic world thing is completely new.
Like it's its own little world?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've always been interested in magic, and I've always known about my great-grandfather, but I was really surprised
that other people knew all about him.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of Chinese magicians more famous than him.
Only a few, and they weren't Chinese.
Because Fu Manchu was Dutch, right?
Fu Manchu is the son of Aikido. His name was David Bamberg. Very few in those days had ever been to China.
Right.
So you can talk about the wonderful things in China, and if you hadn't been there, you didn't know.
It didn't matter to anyone whether the magicians were really Chinese or not. The Orient represented mystery, and it fit magic well. But I mean, like the Egypt theme, for example. I mean, they didn't dress up like they were Egyptians.
Sure they did.
The main reason Westerners dressed up as Asians was it drew in the crowds. Maybe a bit of magic history would be helpful here. Before Long Tack Sam, there was another real Chinese performer, stage-named Qin Ling Fu. Qin Ling Fu was such a success on the international vaudeville circuit that he sparked a long line of Asian impersonators, the most famous being Billy Robinson, stage-named Chung Ling Su, who traveled on stage and off as a Chinese. This was a time when it was possible to speak fake Chinese to the press and audiences and get away with it. Chung challenged Ching to a magical duel in London, which was never fought. Ching returned to his native China, while Chung continued to great success until his untimely death on stage during his bullet-catching trick. People have always thrilled to daredevils. Audiences have always wanted speed and excitement and an element of danger. Long Tack Sam's act included displays of acrobatic skill with fire, tridents, and swords. I got a tip from Mark Mitten, a magician I met in New York, to go and talk to Lu Yi, former head of the Shanghai acrobatic troupe, who now teaches American kids at the School for the Circus Arts in San Francisco.
The kind hands that China call 骡子顶.
骡子顶.
Yeah, 骡子顶. It's called a 骡子顶. And same they use the animal that something, you know.
Yes.
That legs come down, something like this.
But this is all from martial arts, yeah?
No. That is from acrobatic.
Lu Yi tells me this act is part of a 3,000-year-old Chinese tradition. All performance arts in China came from acrobatics.
What do you do normally? Are you doing magic or doing No, you just like?
No, I make films.
Oh, you make film?
Yeah.
Ah, yeah. You do that job?
J. Marshall mentioned how beautiful these shows were. Let me give you an idea of their opulence. I was able to hunt down Sam's backdrop, which is stored in the Museum of Anthropology in Vancouver, BC. My grandmother, Minna, had donated the fabric back in 1976 to a music school, and somehow it landed up here. All the information they had on it was that it belonged to a guy who was friends with Jack Benny. This fabric was made by the famous silk weavers of Suzhou back in the 20s, embellished with Buddhist symbols, the bat for luck, the dragon for strength, mirrors to ward off misfortune.
The house curtain rises, revealing a shimmering and iridescent oriental curtain of dazzling silks, bedragoned and pagoded in a mellow blue light that lifts to unveil Long Tack Sam, the master showman and highest development in Chinese entertainment, surrounded by 5 men and a girl, all dressed in different celestial costumes, the whole thing forming
Orientalism was very popular at the beginning of the 20th century. People loved the spectacle on the stage. But what would it have been like socializing as an Asian in North America?
Since he is not a white man, he knows that what he does usually has to be twice as good. But he's just
strong.
Persevere.
Long Tack Sam doesn't just play vaudeville houses, he plays veterans halls. He plays children's hospitals. Anything for a buck, anything to win over the American audience. And everywhere Sam travels, he travels with an international group of vaudeville performers. They travel from coast to coast and every town in between. Sam becomes an amazing mimic, picking up the accents of everyone he tours with. The reviews said he even spoke some Yiddish.
He spoke a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
French,
German.
都很好。
He can speak very good English.
A German accent.
Almost like Italian, really.
You would say, one a minute. That's, wait a minute.
A Mandarin accent.
Anything. Just switch like that.
An American accent.
Well, when I say linguist, he probably didn't speak any language.
Sam is like a sponge, absorbing everything and throwing it into his act. He incorporates Western, particularly American, popular culture in order to stay in demand. Maybe this is what made him stand apart from other traditional Chinese shows, his willingness to adapt.
Damn clever, these Chinese.
He's a magician and acrobats in Chinese style and Western style. People like that.
Long Tack Sam hones his act and his persona into a cosmopolitan mix of non-stop entertainment. He does comedy, he does impersonations, he does the latest dance craze. The Long Tack Sam troupe opened for the Marx Brothers on the second bill ever of New York's preeminent vaudeville house, the Palace Theater. They're a smash hit. The troupe plays the Palace 7 times, more than anyone else, including Houdini. In this article, Sam lays out the philosophical difference between Eastern and Western magic, saying Westerners give away too much and present themselves as skillful tricksters. Chinese magicians are more mysterious, true conjurers and necromancers who keep the company of spirits. It was about real magic, not illusion. Tall tales, I think. But the family believes in spirits. I go to Bolinas to meet Sam's granddaughter, Ruby Lee. She, too, is a conjurer of sorts. Her paintings are of goddesses, and she has visions of her grandfather, whose ruby ring she wears around her neck. I thought she might be able to tell me something more about his life, but she is just as curious as I am. I wonder how Sam must have been feeling, alone in America, so far from home. Put it this way, receiving a letter from Europe is a photo opportunity. And it's not all good news. It's clear from the headlines why Poldy's missives are so few and far between. World War I starts in Europe. America, initially, stays neutral, even after the sinking of the Lusitania. But she is eventually dragged into the war. Sam is crazy with worry about his family, but no passenger liners are willing to cross the Atlantic with German U-boats lurking below. This means Sam can't even send money home, which is the reason he went to America in the first place. Sam stays in the States for years, waiting, I imagine, for the war to be over. There's a story waiting for me in Nashville, Tennessee, home of the Egyptian Hall Museum of Magic. In 1999, this collection was in the residence of David Price Jr. and his wife, Mary Jane, passed on to them by his father.
But I know my dad had looked for years for a Long Tack Sam poster. Now let's see.
In the Price Collection's library, I find another version of Sam's origin story.
Surely you have noticed in your researches that you cannot believe everything in print.
No, well, yes. In this version, Sam has connections to the imperial court.
At the end of the 19th century, China was a land ravaged by famine, drought, and rebellion. In a northern village lived me, Long Tack Sam. My father was an imperial officer in the service of the emperor. My boyhood was that of the usual Chinese child of my station. It would have been quite different had I not tried with some other boys to see who could throw a stone highest in the air. I won, but my stone came down among the jade display of a street merchant and broke a jade bracelet. Oh, the peddler was furious, and I was badly frightened. I began to run. As I ran, I became more frightened, for I realized that as an official son, I would be recognized. Rather than risk the parental wrath, I decided that the only thing to do was to leave home forever and start out into the world to make my fortune. I was not yet 9 years old. I kept on going until finally I came to a river where a crowd who were waiting for a ferry stood watching a boy juggle. This boy was only a little older than myself. The crowd seemed amused and gave the boy several coppers. I finally got up enough courage to step into the circle and offer to continue the entertainment. I was liked, and because I was such a little fellow, they were as generous to me as they had been to the boy who was better trained. As I was picking up the coins that had been thrown to me, the ferry came and all the people got on board.
Hey, you're pretty good. Ever think of going pro? I'm training with a magician in Shenzhen.
I liked the idea of being a magician's assistant and asked the boy if I could go with him. He not only agreed to that, but assured me that the master magician would be glad to have another apprentice. We performed juggling feats whenever we got hungry, and were usually fortunate enough to find people who were sufficiently amused to give money or food. We tramped day after day until we made friends with a riverboat man, with whom we rode the rest of the way. That is, we rode during the time the wind blew. We arrived at Shenzhen one morning. I was told to stand outside the city wall and wait until the older boy went to his master. But he did not return. Tired and hungry, I walked around until I found the fairgrounds. I passed the storyteller, the man who made the shadow pictures, and the fortune teller. Finally, I came to a large circle of people who were laughing and applauding. I wriggled my way into the center of the circle just in time to see the last trick of the magician who was creating such merriment. I knew I had found my future master.
Sam may be able to change his own history, but he can't change the world's. The war is not over until Germany and Austria concede defeat on very harsh terms indeed. I can't imagine what it must have been like for Sam, after becoming incredibly successful in the States, to come back to Europe. He's finally reunited with the love of his life, Poldy, and his children, but Austria is impoverished and destroyed by war. The most important thing is to keep the family together. He makes Poldy his manager and his assistant, and he needs a good manager to get him and his troop and his 5 tons of gear around the world. But Poldy had never been outside of Austria before, and theirs was to be a life of non-stop world travel. Sam had made a lot of money in the States, but I heard he threw it around like water, so there was no break from being on the road. With his frugal wife on board, he returns to America. Poldy had always worked for a living, but how she made the transition from small-town shop clerk to international circus manager is anyone's guess. It must have been exciting, but I'm tired just thinking about it.
These boys traveled at a time when you needed to fix something, you better be able to do it yourself. These are called stage pegs, but they came in handy if some of your apparatus wasn't standing vertically, whether the stage was uneven or whatever. You'd just screw these into the floor and anchor it. You never wanted the manager to know you had them in your trunk, though, because you'd just leave the holes right in the stage floor.
But it couldn't have been with that full troupe. It's impossible he traveled with 80 people.
Oh, yes, sometimes. Yes.
They had to be able to unload the stuff from the railroad car to a truck, then driven to the theater to put on the show.
The reviews of the Long Tack Sam show are unanimously positive. But remember, it isn't just Sam and Poldy and the troupe. They are traveling with their 2 daughters, Minna and Poldy, who are growing up in a traveling circus. None of Sam and Poldy's descendants are in the circus anymore, per se, but a bunch of us still work in the business. I have a cousin, Dana, who dances on Broadway, and this is my cousin Karen, the queen of rhythm, who lives in Berkeley. She's a drummer and a bit of a snake charmer. She, too, is interested in stories of the road.
That's a really good camera. Look at her.
Everybody on the road eventually has to work, so Sam incorporates his daughters into the act as soon as they are old enough. My grandmother, Minna, is stage named the more Chinesey Mi-na and is the first to join them. Daughter Poldy, stage name Mi-sa, is not far behind. The girls are billed as twins. Sam highlights their mix of European and Asian cultures. Hard to believe, but these girls were competing for audiences with the likes of Harry Houdini. Houdini, by the way, invited Sam to join his exclusive magic club. Maybe this was because he liked to keep his competitors close, because the next year, he prevents anyone from performing the ancient Chinese needle-swallowing trick by taking out a bogus patent on it. Have you ever seen this trick? Here's Sam and Poldy. I know for a fact this was a staple of Long Tack Sam's act. He had to cut it out. First it's a Chinese revolution, now it's a U.S. copyright issue. Sam adjusts, that's show business. It's hard to imagine how big vaudeville was in its heyday. At the Hippodrome in New York City, over 1,000 performers shared a revolving stage over a block long.
Dear friend Goldstein, Lester arrived on Wednesday. I had to rush to the Hippodrome for the matinee. I am doing very nicely. We'll stay in New York the full season. Maurice is going good on the Pantages tour. Gus Fowler is a sensation on the Key tour. Yiska and several other magicians are in my apartment every evening.
Long Tack Sam is having a ball. But things are changing for vaudeville in America. Moving pictures are starting to be incorporated between the live acts. They turn out to be cheaper to run and can run all day. Meanwhile, stage crews are being unionized. Acts are getting smaller. The vaudeville routines performed in front of the curtain were there because you didn't have to pay union wages over the orchestra pit. And vaudevillians start to compete with movie stars. It's time to leave America for other, cheaper shores. The Long Tack Sam troupe crosses the Pacific. Sam turns to New Zealand, Australia, and China, looking for new audiences and a more affordable way to put on his large show. To places where a vaudeville variety act could still sell out a theater all by itself. Sam said Australian audiences were his favorite in the world, the most critical. Oh, they were critical, all right. My brother lives in Australia. I've never met my niece, and a cousin is getting married in Sydney. So, I buy a ticket and find myself doing a little more research on Long Tack Sam Down Under. December in Sydney is sweltering. Sam was here at Christmas too. He promoted his show by skydiving into Bondi Beach. Sam was wildly popular in Australia. He was so popular in Australia, people thought he was Australian.
He's not all the way Chinese, he's part Australian.
No.
Yeah?
He's all Chinese.
He's all Chinese.
Long Tack Sam is all Chinese.
So he had to go through the same struggle too.
When at first he came to Australia, they put him to the prison. Yeah.
后时候呢，那里的华侨把我保出来的。
And the Chinese people there to put him out, to help him. Yeah.
Wow.
The articles that I find in Australia about Sam talk about his successes, not his problems. He went back every year. But it must be China that Sam anticipates returning to. He's been gone for 20 years, and now he's coming home. I want to go too, but I don't speak Chinese. I don't know how I'm going to find anything.
Well, I can help you go to China, visit.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to go. The comfort and the safety. Please.
小小的村庄，有个淳朴的男孩，走遍天涯海角，多么潇洒，多么自在。他在寻找那美好的未来，正在寻找那美好的时光。
Sam returns here as much a tourist as he does a performer. He was a small boy from a small town when he left. Now he's a big star with a foreign wife. And this is the first time Poldy had experienced the culture she'd married into as something besides an exotic stage act. But the life of the circus performer is much the same the world over. Parades, promotion, and all-round razzmatazz. I get taken to the Jinjiang Hotel, old-time host to presidents and luminaries. It's a strange feeling being in this hotel. My great-grandparents could have stayed here. They could have sat in these chairs. If only walls could speak. Around the corner from the hotel lives someone who can tell me about history, Mr. Sun Tai. Sun Tai, a young voice artist when Long Tack Sam first came back to China in 1920, remembers him. He takes me on a particular tour of old Shanghai. I have absolutely no idea where we're going.
This
is used by your late grandfather.
Yes.
Sam was the major shareholder of 5 theaters in Shanghai: the Majestic, the Metropole, the Grand, the Cathay, and the Nanking. I had no idea any of these theaters still existed. A few of them are literally a stone's throw from my hotel room. Sam brings Western glamour back to the Orient. Everyone loves it. It cost up to $3 silver to see their show, the same amount as a 20-pound bag of rice. But the house was full every night. Sam builds a home in Shanghai, Villa Long, as a base for his family. But then the story gets complicated.
Mr. Sun Tai know the history of Long Tack Sam.
At the end of the 19th century, China was in turmoil, ravaged by famine, droughts, and widespread rebellion. In the northern village of Wuchao lived little Long Tack Sam. He was forced to endure long hours of acrobatics training under his elder brother's instruction. At the age of 13, Long decided to make his own way in the world and ran away. He made a living as a street performer on the piers of Shanghai. The celebrated acrobat Julian Kwai watched little Long perform. Great show, kid. How would you like to join my Tang Kwai troupe on an American tour?
Oh boy, you bet.
At that time, he's very famous for the handy hair.
In America.
In America.
因为他有这个吊辫子。
His wife from Switzerland came to America to see him this show and was to fall in love with him.
Wow.
Yeah.
The bit about Julian Kwai made sense. Sam had been with the Tan Kwai troupe. But I had never heard of a brother or an acrobatic family or a Swiss wife who came to America to marry him. Mr. Sun Tai offers me some hot water to make me feel better.
Okay, thank you.
He called you to take your.
But what if this is only another story? What I knew was that Sam came back to China with my great-grandmother, Poldy, who was the only wife I had ever heard of. Poldy, who was now pregnant with her 3rd child 15 years after her first daughter was born. But Sun Tai has more surprises.
His brother's name is called Long Tack Sam.
What? If his brother is the real Long Tack Sam, then who is my great-grandfather?
Mr.
Tan don't know the exact name, but
大概是小名叫顺儿，
maybe called Sure.
顺
就是一代一代传下顺。
顺。
In China, Sam is reunited with the brother no one knew he had, the one who taught him acrobatics, the one whose name he stole. And they fought over Poldy. Stories diverge as to whether Sam's brother wanted to kiss or to kill Poldy because she was a foreigner. Whatever the case, Long Tack Sam created a new story about his beginnings, incorporating his newfound feelings for his long-lost brother.
In a small northern village lived me, sad little Long Tack Sam, who was trained in acrobatics by my cruel older brother.
His brother taught him so severe, so like a punishment.
Oh, police number 1, I am tired and need to rest. Oh!
You will rest when I tell you to.
When I am 9, me and the other students decide to run away. We escape late one night and make for Shanghai. I am caught by my brother a short time later and am dragged back to the village to endure even harsher training. 4 years later, I again run away to Shanghai and stow away on a night boat to Hong Kong.
I want to find this brother, or at least his descendants.
And so his family must have been acrobats.
Yeah, still do acrobat.
They still do?
Yeah, still do.
Same family?
Yeah, same family in the Shandong.
I had no idea I could possibly still have relatives somewhere in China. But how to find them? At this point, all I know is that Long Tack Sam was from somewhere in Shandong province. And I've been invited to the Wuchao International Acrobatic Festival, which is actually held in a town called Shijiazhuang. Shijiazhuang, interestingly enough, is the final resting place of Norman Bethune, the Canadian doctor still revered in China.
You know, he died of gangrene.
Only 49.
Yeah, he cut his finger.
Yeah. I know.
There are also features from Beijing, Liaoning, Shanxi, Chongqing, and guests from both home and abroad. 热烈的欢迎，同时呢，便将以这个最精彩的体验呈现在大家的面前。
China is trying to reclaim its acrobatic history. Acrobats are either in or out of favor with each passing dynasty or revolution. Politics writes history more than anything else does. And with each passing generation, here, like everywhere, there is a little less of the past, a little less of Long Tack Sam. In China, it is the acrobats, not the historians, that keep his name alive. In China, at least in this part of China, there is magic everywhere. I meet some acrobats who arranged to take me to Wuchao, the birthplace of Chinese acrobatics, which is actually a few hours' ride away from where I am. With a few phone calls, we are able to find the exact location of Long Tack Sam's native village. This is so easy.
I found it. Here.
Okay.
And from Wuqiao to Ningjing have a way of province way.
Okay.
This way?
Yes.
Very near.
Okay.
Everyone is excited to help me find my family. Wuchao used to be in Shandong province, but the border has been recently moved and now it is in Hebei province. There is an acrobatic academy right there. I join a group going to tour this academy. We start at the break of dawn. The town that Long Tack Sam comes from, ostensibly, is just on the other side of the border.
Liu Junyi, make a welcoming speech. Mr. Liu, please.
Here I begin to understand the enormous trek Long Tack Sam made from a child in the country to international celebrity. What began on the streets of Wuchao is now institutionalized across China. There is an acrobatic academy just like this one in every province. Children start going here as soon as they can walk. They're trained to be entertainers, and their working lifespan is extremely short. The international acrobatic community comes and chooses who they want to work with for 1 or 2 years, which is as long as the visas extend for. Everyone, from Russian circuses to Le Cirque du Soleil, they take young acrobats, develop routines for them, and send them back to China to train the next generation. There's a taxi waiting for me to take me to the village of my ancestors, but I'm not allowed to continue on by myself. As a guest of the festival, I'm not allowed to make independent forays into the countryside. It turns out that the Falun Gong trials are happening here, and security, especially for foreigners, is extra tight. I'm not going to be able to find my family roots here. Not this time, anyway. I've traveled 10,000 miles to get here, and they tell me to come back next year.
那不没关系，那没关系。
It doesn't matter for the fever. You got.
I have a little fever.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I'm sick as a dog. They're having me drink a lot of water with salt and sugar in it together, which is still a lot better than going to the hospital.
It's because water is too small.
So it's been really hard, harder than I thought. We'll see how it goes. My visa expires, and I have to leave China. I have the same problem with borders all over the world. I can only imagine the hassles Sam encountered traveling around with his troupe of acrobats. How did he deal with the red tape? I go to England to visit my parents who live there. My mother holds a British passport. I can't even get a working visa. I know they don't know much about Long Tack Sam's peregrinations, but my uncle has a good story.
Don't know where I heard this one from, but I'm sure it's genuine. He had to do a border crossing, I think to Russia or something like that. And in those days, they stopped him and said, "Where's your passport?" You see, he had no passport. He had no visa, actually. I think it was a visa. So he went to the back somewhere. He found a package of Chinese tea, cut the little label off from the front, a red label or something like that with some Chinese writing, and presented it to the border guard, and he got through, and that was his visa.
I go to the Magic Circle, the exclusive magicians club. Now, magic is a strange world, and this is one of its most secretive societies. But again, people are willing to help me do research on my great-grandfather. But no one remembers much of him here. Strange, because Sam spent a lot of time in England. In fact, in one of his stories, this is where he first came after leaving China, so very long ago.
And on the dock side, he did the acrobats, and people like him and threw the money, penny. And he collected money, so much. First time he saw so much money.
He stays in London for a few years, making an excellent living as a young street performer. As for his visa,
no problem.
For Sam, the West is paved with streets of gold. He even designed a logo with a long tack through an S, showing how his name alone means money. They say success breeds success. I don't know how he did it, but while he was touring the world as an acrobat and magician, Sam also opens 2 restaurants in London, one in Piccadilly Circus, the other in Soho, called Maxime's, one of the first Chinese restaurants in the city. It was fancy, too. While the Long Tack Sam troupe continues to globetrot trying to make a decent living, in America, in the 20s, most of the acts Sam used to share a bill with had moved out to Hollywood to get into the movies. Now performers didn't have to travel all the time, and that was very attractive indeed. Poldy certainly is very tired of the international vaudeville circuit. She's lost her father, and touring is no life for her newborn son, Frank, nicknamed Bobby. She wants to go home. So in 1924, Long Tack Sam builds a second Villa Long, this time in Austria. The troupe continues to tour. Poldy is torn. Her girls are in the show, and she doesn't want to be separated from her Sam. She leaves Bobby with her family. He spends his first few years without really knowing his parents at all.
And they would come and visit to Austria every 3 years, from when the show broke up for a while, and they would buy me presents, and I like that.
When the family does get together, they look like a happy group. Whatever Sam's real history, he is not in contact with his family in China, but he surely enjoyed the close relationship he had with Poldy's. Here he is clowning around with his sister-in-law Mitzi, his brother-in-law Max, and his tiny mother-in-law. In truth, the entire family was rarely home. It must have put a strain on everybody. I asked Ernst Kriegbaum about the marriage.
Ich glaube, die Ehe war gut. Sam hat seine Frau sehr geliebt, hat für sie alles getan. War ein sehr lieber Mensch. Nur, glaube ich, war sie nicht ganz glücklich. Sie war immer zerrissen zwischen Österreich und Amerika. Österreich war ja dann zu klein, Amerika war die Sehnsucht nach der Heimat da. Ja. War nicht sehr glücklich für Frau. Ich glaube, glücklich war sie mit den Kindern. Bobby hat es sehr gern, hatte Bobby gehabt.
Austria, on the other hand, is like a vacation for her daughters. They're able to have the semblance of a normal life, free from the restrictions of the show.
Die hatten damals schon ein Auto und da sind wir als junge Menschen abends ins Kaffeehaus gegangen und tanzen. Sind wir natürlich überall aufgefallen. Ich war mit der Mina befreundet und der Baumgärtl war mit der Polly befreundet. Und wir 4 sind immer abends tanzen gegangen. Eine schöne Zeit.
When Bobby is 5, he is deemed old enough to take on the road, but only as an observer. There'll be no more performers in the family. Not officially. Right in the middle, between their travels from the west to the east, right in the middle of Eastern and Western cultures, are the islands of Hawaii, which the Longs love to return to season after season. Every year there was a big show in Hawaii. Hawaii, the stopover for every Trans-Pacific trip. I go to Oahu to talk to people who remember the act. There was a substantial Chinese population there. Many had come as indentured workers and had bought their freedom. They all brought their families to see the show.
Yeah, be the magician, and it was Chinese, and everybody went. Yes, that's right.
They brought them with pride. Long Tack Sam was playing in front of movies in Hawaii too, but the Chinese Association couldn't get enough of the troupe.
Any Chinese, my age, they would remember.
They would always book extra performances of full evening shows. Sam's annual farewell tour always went over very well. At this point in his career, Sam is extremely famous for one particular trick, which combines both acrobatics and magic.
Do you guys know about his water bowl trick, the fish?
What happened, he runs across the stage, he turns over.
Did a somersault.
This, and did a forward somersault.
His water
He tumbled over, and then when he comes up with a large bowl of water. It's fantastic.
There's probably a copy quicker than the eye around here that has not a cartoon, a sketch of him. It's maybe let's try it. And it's by Cyrus Leroy Baldridge, who is
course, I have relatives here too that I haven't seen in a while. I go to visit one of Sam's granddaughters, my Aunt Vivian, at her home in Cocoa Head. I heard that Vivian had some of Sam's costumes in a trunk. Liko Pang, who saw the act as a child, told me how beautiful they were.
All I remember is it's very pleasing to the eye. Everything is so colorful.
Oh my God, it's heavy. Wow, this is all it?
This is phenomenal. It's been years since I opened this up.
Oh my God, this is a sash.
I use that as a table.
These costumes, from the silk city of Suzhou, south of Shanghai, had to be completely replaced every 2 years because of wear and tear from the show. No one in the family knew Vivian even had these things because no one had ever asked.
Who is he made a mandarin by?
I don't know, Granny never
And their significance was a mystery since no one of this generation had ever seen the show.
And it can breathe.
Right.
I find other artifacts. Parts from a bow and arrow routine. His magic feather. And stories.
Can you describe the occasion?
I was sent to represent the Marine Corps in an advertising situation because the Marine Corps had been involved also, and George Burns was there receiving an award. I sat on the dais with him side by side, and I asked him at that time if he recalled Long Tack Sam, who was the father of my mother-in-law. And with that, he virtually rose out of the chair, turned around, grabbed my arm, and said, "The greatest vaudeville act I've ever seen." But his acrobatics were just a pièce de résistance to the act. He was a great magician, and he had 2 beautiful daughters. They were smashing.
Remember the beautiful young ladies he had with him on the show.
They are talking about Mina and Nisa, now the main attraction in the act. As their father said,
They do the work. I get the money.
Sam, because he traveled so fluidly back and forth between Europe and the Americas, and because he was always updating his act, was one of the first conduits of Western magic to the East. For instance, the tune The Doll Dance came out in the States and was immediately incorporated into a magic act where a woman appears from the interior of a little dollhouse. Everyone was doing this trick. Mina was performing that act in China the very same year.
He would turn it around once, and he would open it up, and there was a little doll in like that. Then he would turn it around again, and there was a doll about this size. And then he would turn it around again, and Mina would jump out from the back.
And people like very much, you know. They are half Chinese and half Western. They like it.
My mother was very proud when she heard that I wanted to be a ballerina. She saw to it that I didn't give up. She took me to the best dancing teacher, which was Papalou's partner, Morozov.
Nisa played the violin, sang, and did contortions.
Singing.
Singing?
Yeah.
But also dancing, no?
Dancing, singing, and Nisa played violin.
Huh.
Very good.
Everywhere they go, Sam is picking up ideas and throwing them into the act, mainly featuring his 2 daughters. From Parisian toe dance to Maori war dance, if it was entertaining, it was in the show. I found some letters Sam wrote to friends while on the road. These ones are to the English illusionist Will Goldston.
Dear Willie, your letter from March 21st received, and I sure was glad to hear from you. It sure must be bad in the States now for vaudeville, as your letter states. How is everything with you? We all hope that you are enjoying the best of health and are enjoying a good season. Dear Willie, leaving tomorrow for Rio Teatro Odeon, then Sao Paulo. We sailed June 17th on the SS American Legion. We played 7 weeks at the Cine Florida, breaking house records. Come fishing! Dear Willie, just a few lines to let you know at present we are touring Java after a successful engagement in Manila. Haven't forgotten about that shadow thing you asked me to get for you. We'll head for Singapore from Batavia, so if you have time, drop me a line at the Capitol Theatre.
It's very different holidays at home in Austria at the end of the 20s. Hitler is not going to be elected chancellor until 1933, but he is definitely on the political landscape. He is already a source of ridicule to some people. Everyone in my family thought he was pretty funny. But he's soon to become a very dangerous force. My theory is, while people were mimicking Hitler, Hitler was mimicking the most popular entertainer of the time, Charlie Chaplin, by growing a little mustache to try and make himself more likable. Everyone was mimicking Chaplin. Long Tack Sam toured with the Chaplin impersonator, Charlie Rival. Little Bobby Long did Chaplin. Even Felix the Cat did Chaplin. Here is Hitler, the Chaplin impersonator, visiting a boys' school in Linz. Behind him, in the shadows, stands the Eurasian Bobby Long, not a welcome part of Hitler's long-term plan. If everything worked out, Linz was to be the capital of the Third Reich. Again, there is Great Depression and poverty in Germany, and these elements often breed intolerance. Fascism is on the rise. At the same time, vaudeville, burlesque, nightclubs were at their height in cities such as Berlin. Poldy may feel comfortable playing tourist, but her girls are under a different kind of scrutiny. The Long Tack Sam troupe plays the Scala Theatre. The reviews are mixed because the girls are. Now they are not Chinese enough. What used to work in their favor, their cross-cultural heritage and hybrid act, now works against them. The new Germany demands purity of race and of form. Sam worries about his girls. He keeps them under his watchful eye.
And my father was very, very strict. Because he said, as I told you before, first of all, you're in show business. Second, you're Eurasian, which was at that time not so hot. And that's why I'm bringing you up double as strict. So we weren't allowed to mix up with many people. I wasn't allowed to go out by myself. I was 25 years old.
The troupe goes to America to escape the European blues. Don't they call the U.S. the melting pot of culture? But after the stock market crash of 1929 and the Dust Bowl years of the dirty 30s, the U.S. is reeling from its own depression. More than ever, America needs its escapist entertainment. Long Tack Sam still puts on his big show in hard times and plies his trade in front of the movies. Getting a gig in a vaudeville show was still one of the best jobs in town. Here are some snapshots I received from Badana Khan, a 16-year-old chorus girl who performed with my family. My grandmother wrote to her for years. It was Prohibition. Misa was dating Al Capone. Or maybe that's just another story. Sam creates a dance for Sid Grauman, starring Mina, to be performed as a prologue in front of the new Rita Hayworth vehicle Rain, which is opening at Grauman's Chinese Theatre in Hollywood. The girls get screen tested. After all, the writing is on the wall. Movies are killing vaudeville. But they are rejected for parts in movies like The Good Earth, being told they are too pretty to play Chinese girls. Sam refuses to let anyone in his family appear in movies that portray the Chinese people in an unfavorable light. Long Tack Sam had built a career on presenting a beautiful show with beautiful performers, but that isn't how Hollywood wants to see Chinese. He may have spent his whole life adjusting to his audience, but now he puts his foot down. He is not going to Hollywood, and neither are his daughters. The girls are going to stay on the stage and off the screen, taking second billing to new Hollywood starlets like Loretta Young and Jean Harlow. The troupe would normally do the Orpheum circuit that crosses the border into Canada. But by 1932, Canada's Chinese Immigration Act and the U.S.'s Chinese Exclusion Act had been stepped up to make travel even more difficult, though there was still special dispensation made for entertainers. Poldy just isn't up to managing the troupe anymore. Sam agrees to create a revue for the impresarios Fanshawe and Marco, who bring them up the West Coast. They perform Shanghai in Vancouver in front of the ominously named One-Way Passage at the Orpheum Theatre. Vaudeville is like a sausage factory at this point. The girls are still young enough to keep up with the pace, but Long Tack Sam is really feeling his years.
He had a whole huge lump here. The vertebrae was sort of malformed here from all the acrobats he did.
Life is strange. Had they wanted to, Sam and Poldy wouldn't have been allowed to stay in Canada in 1932, but Minna moved here many years later. Their son Bobby wasn't here with his family back then, but he lives here now.
Hello.
Hi, it's Ann Marie.
I'll let you in, take the elevator to the 3rd floor and make a right.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bobby gives me the skinny on what happened to the troupe and the family. The touring starts to wind down. Minna opens a dance studio in Shanghai and starts writing a column for the China News espousing equality through physical education for China's 200 million women. She gives up the studio to join the Red Cross when the Japanese incursions begin. Eventually, Minna abandons show business altogether and marries my grandfather, Ernest To, who belongs to 3 generations of Hong Kong doctors.
My parents were so cheesed off that they wouldn't even go to Granny's wedding.
Yeah. Nisa tries to manage her father's show on her own. She also jumps ship and marries the wealthy Shanghai industrialist, N.C. Yao. Sam wants something better for his daughters than a life on the road. He wants them to marry into respectable Chinese families, but he still doesn't make it to either of their weddings. The show is over. Sam and Poldy retire and go to England to get Bobby.
Yeah, I was in boarding school.
He's 15. School's over. They bring him to Austria, to Linz, and to Villa Long for a vacation. They could not have picked a worse time. War breaks out. Germany invades Poland. Austria is automatically drawn in. They can't go back to England because of Poldy's nationality.
Then we couldn't return to England because of my mother being German by birth, because Austria was part of Germany then.
Right.
And the British wouldn't let us back because she was considered an enemy alien, even though she had a Chinese passport.
But back in her native Austria, the Nazis searched through 400 years of church records to try and find Jewish ancestry. How long before they ask another question about race and culture? The family tries to leave Europe through still neutral Italy. These pictures show the well-heeled Longs enjoying themselves. But they are exiles on the run. Mussolini, the populist Italian leader, is about to throw his fascist support behind Hitler. Italy is drawn into the war. Luckily, the Longs have the funds and friends to help get them out of Europe. They take the boat to America, which is not yet in the war. Landing in New York City in 1940, Sam is interviewed for the World News.
They had two married daughters, Mina living in Hong Kong, Lisa living in Shanghai, and a son, Frank, 15, who's with his parents.
He says he's on his way to China, stopping off to buy soap for relatives in Austria who are without any amenities. All he wants is a normal life for his son. And that means a life without show business, a life that is unthinkable for Long Tack Sam, even in his exile and retirement. It is in Marshall, Michigan, in the American Museum of Magic, that I find out how Sam and Poldy spent that August in New York. Elaine Lund looks after her husband Robert's legacy, the artifacts of America's golden age of magic. In her basement, filed by year, is every event that happened in magic in America in the 20th century. The Society of American Magicians puts on a benefit dinner for Long Tack Sam. I can see in these pictures that Poldy's nerves are beginning to fray.
I really don't know what was
You went to visit her, didn't you?
Yeah.
Last time I saw her, it's already not normal. Not normal.
They can't stay in America. The only place left to go is back to China, Sam's homeland, and to Shanghai, one of the few open cities left in the world. Things are not completely normal in Shanghai either. There have been skirmishes with the Japanese around the Manchurian border, but the Japanese have been insinuating themselves into China for such a long time that people are almost used to it. It still feels safer than the war in Europe. Many magicians and friends pass through here, most notably Max Malini, perhaps the only person in magic shorter than Long Tack Sam, and his dear friend Edwin Dern, an amateur magician and historian. The Derns become their closest companions. But once again, Sam's timing is terribly wrong. The Japanese overtake Shanghai. Soon after these pictures are taken, the Derns are put in camp for 3 years. The Japanese join sides with the Germans and formally declare war on China. The same thing that kept the Longs out of England and America saves them in this particular instance, Poldy's Austrian nationality and German language. Sam magically escapes persecution once again. Sam told the magician John Booth a little bit about that time.
When the Japanese first moved into China, they took this British commander of the police, big man, about 6'3", healthy looking, fine man, and they started torturing him. And it was a quiet night. You could hear all the sounds for a mile around stopped. People just listening to the cries of this man as he was being tortured and slowly dying. And he said, John, I can't even tell you the torture they inflicted on that man. He said, finally, it stopped, and the whole city just breathed a sigh of relief. This torture was over. But the way he described it was something that I never forgot.
With the bombing of the U.S. military base in Hawaii's Pearl Harbor, the Americans are drawn into the war. World War II is officially all over the globe now, and war in the Pacific is to last long after the European peace is made. It is not until 1945, after the atomic bombs are dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, that the Japanese concede defeat, the same year that Bobby marries a woman of Japanese descent, another triumph of love over history. Sam and Poldy are appalled.
Because my dad was against marrying anyone who had some Japanese blood.
Oh, yes. The Japanese were all being sent back. But I didn't really want to go, and I said I was going to get married to Frank. My dad said it was okay, but Mother was a bit concerned.
Then the roof almost fell in. God. They were just dumbfounded. And they just didn't want to talk to me anymore. They said, well, we're finished. I said, okay, if you feel that way.
So, Sam cuts off ties with his son. Sam and Poldy stay in Shanghai after the Japanese are driven out. After all, Nisa and her husband are still there. But there is something else on the horizon. The Communist Revolutionary Army is coming. After years of civil war, the Communists, under Mao Zedong, have a special vendetta against Shanghai because of its association with the losing side of that exchange, especially the Republican Chiang Kai-shek. Sam and Poldy leave in 1948, just in front of the Communist Revolution. They sail for America via Hong Kong, on the way reconciling with Minna and Bobby. The war has given everybody an opportunity to reconsider their priorities.
And then we said, well, look, how about coming to our place and spending the night here with us? We have nice soft beds, because they always complain about the beds in Hong Kong. They were so hard. So they said, okay, we'll come over, and then they slept on our beds, and we slept on the couch in the living room. And the next morning they said, oh, what a lovely sleep we had. Everything was fine. And that's how it ended all. Everything ended well.
The U.S. has finally rescinded its Exclusion Act to reward Chinese for their service to the country during the war. Landing in New York City, Sam is granted refugee status and then American citizenship. But not Poldy. Even though she's carried Chinese citizenship for 40 years, she is still considered an Austrian national. Since the U.S. is not at war with Austria anymore, and Austria is not in danger of being overtaken by communists, the U.S. doesn't want her. She has to keep going to Canada to renew her visitor's visa. America is remarkably untouched by the war, while the rest of the world lies in rubble. Sam, retired as a magician, seems to have no trouble filling his time with exclusive clubs and secret societies of all kinds. He's a member of the Grand Order of the Water Rats, the Vaudeville Club, the International Brotherhood of Magic, the Society of American Magicians, and, oddly enough, he's a 32-degree Mason. Here he is with a group of other Asian Masons in front of a map connecting America to Asia. Making connections was what Sam's life had always been about. Look at their hats. These men are Shriners. They raise money for children by putting on circuses. The show still goes on.
Look on this side if you want. I just want to go video.
Sam and Poldy lived at the Ruxton Hotel.
Sure. Okay, I'll come back.
And it was a small apartment. They were there for many years, and we spent at least 3 Christmases with them there.
So they would set me down in the morning for a bit of milk or the newspapers or something. Yeah, can't remember much.
You went every Christmas?
No, just once.
Just once?
Just once. And we stayed with them, and it was fun.
Grandpa used to love to stay up and watch wrestling matches in the evenings.
Well, he was just such a nice man, you know. Just so good to children, to us, anyhow. And he played so much with his budgerigar. And of course, Grandma used our shampoo, because that was when the first shampoo came out in a tube, and she thought it was toothpaste. So she came out foaming, and she says, "How come your toothpaste foams so much?" That was funny.
You were how old?
14, 15. Rosemary was now a little older.
The central Albany exit. Albany is not big, it's a small town.
Yes, very small.
Okay?
Jan and Linda, Nisa's children, were also there.
Middle of Albany, so no matter where you go, you're going to be there.
I met them for the first time, looking for clues in California.
No matter where you go.
Linda had a pile of photos and articles under her bed that her mother kept. Fabulous photographs. Old vaudeville hands are always dropping by Sam and Poldy's place at the Ruxton, keeping each other up on the latest close-up magic technique and reliving stories of the old days. Sam and Poldy are finally settled down, it seems. No work, no war. Sam is now truly magic royalty, and every magician of that time reveres him. Everybody knows him.
I had other teachers, including the great Chinese Long Tack Sam.
The last time Long Tack Sam performs, it is for a Society of American Magicians benefit at the Roxy Theater in New York City in 1958.
The last time I saw Long Tack Sam perform was on the stage of the Roxy Theater. He looked wonderful. He looked very youthful on the stage, and he did his entire act that he did years before. And it was an Oriental review, and they had all Chinese performers in the show.
Sam did the linking rings.
I call it a classic. It's a classic of magic. I love the linking rings.
He was the master of ceremonies in an all-Chinese review.
And he did many wonderful effects, including his somersault where he produces a bowl of water.
He still did his goldfish trick. He was 73 years old. Amongst magicians, Sam was as well known for his money as his magic, but wars and revolutions and an extremely long retirement dwindled his fortunes away. Had they stayed in New York, maybe he would have been remembered, at least in the annals of American entertainment. But Sam and Poldy were in a traffic accident. They went back to Austria to convalesce. But a heating pad burnt Sam's leg one night. He leapt out of bed and broke his femur. Then he developed gangrene.
They didn't look after the infection. In other words, it didn't have to be that way.
In an old cemetery in Linz is the tombstone of Long Tack Sam and Poldy. Poldy, who went mad with grief after his death and died a year later in a sanatorium in Vienna. There's no one left who tends their grave. It's not just Sam and Poldy who are gone. It's their daughters, it's their show, it's their entire history. I think he is forgotten in the West because of the death of vaudeville, because he didn't go into the movies, because he was Chinese. But he's also forgotten in China, perhaps because ultimately he didn't make it his home. But what puzzles me is how he was almost forgotten by his own family. Is this a show business thing? Is this an immigrant thing? Is this because we all keep on moving, keep busy? Distances and differences keep us apart, and we forget to remind each other of our own stories. But I think we're back on track now. Memory is a lot like magic. I finally figured out what this man is trying to say to me.
Anne Marie, you can put down the camera now.
Lately, I've been thinking about you and me. How your laugh is like music lovely. All my wishes, all I wanna do, all you need to do, if my heart is true, and I know it's true, is keep loving you. Darling, this is heaven. Look up in the sky. I'm looking at the sky. Don't you wonder why? What's up in the sky? It's smiling on this guy. Darling, we're in heaven. We two could build a robin's nest and furnish it with love, or fly away to sunny days. You'd be my little turtle dove. Darling, take my hand. Must I take your hand? Don't you understand? What's to understand? Baby, I'm your man. I know we're in heaven.